Hi, this is my review of Hackmaster, Zealot's Guide, Book the First. This is the first in a series of books that offer many options for cleric characters. In the Hackmaster core rulebook, the Player's Handbook, you have many options for clerics. Hackmaster probably has one of the most flexible and versatile versions of the cleric. Because of the different fates, you can fill in any sort of role that is lacking in the party. That is, if you don't have a thief type of character, you can have a cleric with a particular faith that allows him to develop some sort of rogue type abilities. If you don't have a ranger, you also have a cleric that could stand in for the ranger. So there are many ways in which you can adapt the cleric character class in case you feel the group lacks a certain type of specialization. Now let's talk about the quality of the PDF. The quality is great, everything is well written and explained. The graphic design is just like the Player's Handbook, so it looks very neat and much in tune with the theme. The pages look like they came out of some sort of medieval fantasy tome. And when it comes to the images, well, you have the sort of shield for different clerical fates, and you also have a couple of images that represent new gear included in this book 1. The document is not bookmarked, however it's a pretty short document, it's just around 17 pages long, so you will have no trouble at all navigating this PDF. Now let's talk about the content. The Zealot's Guide, Book the First, contains the information to play as 3 of different clerical fates, but you also have new spells and a few pieces of gear or equipment, or rather weapons, that for the most part are very useful in immobilizing your opponents and capturing them. Let's start with the first clerical faith, which is the Congregation of the Dead. So clerics from this sort of cult are neutral evil. They're not going to be that easy to squeeze into a party of adventurers. Maybe you have a group of mercenaries, there could be a way to make them fit in that. But the Congregation of the Dead is all about working for the Harvester of Souls. This is the deity of the Congregation of the Dead. This is an underworld god that feeds on the dead that the members of the Congregation of the Dead offer to him as a sort of sacrifice. So a member of the Congregation of the Dead is constantly seeking to kill any type of living creature, and he offers the deaths or perhaps the spirits of their victims to the Harvester of Souls. They do this because they think that he will gain enough power through this feasting to the point that he will manifest in this material plane and take over the entire world, and he will reward his followers by turning them into powerful undead, such as vampires, wraiths, etc. In fact, in the Congregation of the Dead, there are many undead members. You have many wights, wraiths, ghouls, of course vampires, liches. All sorts of undead are in this cult. So the Congregation of the Dead is quite repulsive to many of the other fates in the Hackmaster world, but it's also quite popular. So, as I said, there could be a way to get a character that follows the Congregation of the Dead or that belongs to this sort of cult. If maybe you have a group of mercenaries. If you're playing an evil campaign, of course you can have a cleric of the Congregation of the Dead, but maybe you have, as I said, a group of mercenaries with barbarians, assassins, fighters, and they are not too interested in doing the right thing. Maybe you could have this sort of cleric, as long as you promise him enough victims to give to the Harvester of Souls. And I think this could be handled in different ways, because maybe you start out with this cleric trying to gain the favor of the Harvester of Souls, and maybe the Harvester of Souls actually goes into this plane of existence, makes his way thanks to the energy gathered by the souls that were delivered to him, and he actually does not reward the cleric. So maybe now the cleric is an enemy of the Harvester of Souls. Maybe this cleric has grown powerful enough to a point that he no longer needs to obtain his power from the Harvester of Souls. Maybe he took a portion of his power, and now he seeks revenge because he was not turned into a powerful vampire or white or whatever. So there could be many ways to handle this. It's not going to be easy to introduce an evil character such as this one in a sort of neutral type of party, but it's possible. You need to do a lot when it comes to role-playing the character, trying to actually get into his personality, because in Hackmaster you actually gain rewards and penalties, experience rewards and reputation rewards, honor and such things, as long as you play your role, as you follow the tenets of your faith, you follow a certain code of conduct. So this is a challenging class to play when it comes to the player characters, but if you are a game master and you are looking to have this powerful evil cleric, this is a great class to have. So a member of the Congregation of the Dead uses sickles or scythes as preferred weapons, and no other weapons are permitted, so he is quite limited. Luckily he has a nice selection of spells. You can use any sort of armor, but you cannot employ shields, and you're going to be quite skilled in the use of intimidation. You're knowledgeable in astrology, literacy. You also have the power to command undead, and you're really good when performing a coup de grace. Usually the thieves and the assassins are the ones who specialize in taking down opponents that have fallen, that are prone, but now they have a sort of rivalry with this Congregation of the Dead cleric. He's also quite skilled at that. Remember that Hackmaster is a very realistic game. Actions happen on a second by second type of basis. So the coup de grace takes a bit of time on the battlefield as you try to get just in the right position to finish off your opponent. Try not to show any openings to your enemies or those that are surrounding you, those hostile forces, because in a very realistic way, they could perhaps try to attack you from behind or rush at you. You never know. You also have a very interesting power. In fact, a power that I think could play havoc in any sort of dungeon exploration, which is Deathly Fear. You basically have the ability to scare not only hirelings and henchmen, but also player characters. You are terrifying. It is described here that when a cleric that follows this faith attacks, he usually decorates his weapons and armor with skulls and anything related to death, and he's making disturbing noises, so it's kind of like you're getting attacked by someone who's pretending to be undead, so to speak, so this is somewhat disturbing. They look like madmen. So you can actually get all sorts of NPCs and player characters scared because of this. They will start running around with no control, perhaps activating traps or getting into other rooms, drawing the attention of other enemies. So this is a cleric that could wreak havoc in a particular encounter, making the encounter a lot more dangerous, because now you have many player characters and non-player characters getting into all sorts of dangerous situations, adding to the danger level or lethality of the encounter. And for each of these traditions presented in Book the First, you have information concerning adversarial fates, confederate fates, advancement within the different orders, different names for the deity, because for example the Harvester of Souls is also known as the Ruler of the Dead or the Bringer of the Grave. He has many names. You also have information on the appearance of each of these gods and deities, the holy days, places of worship, etc. Now let's take a look at some of the spells that you get when you join the Congregation of the Dead. You have spells from 1st level to 20th level. I'm going to read some of them to you. You have Sense Divine Magic, Unholy Resolve, Cursing, Contagion, Animate Skeleton, Animate Zombie, Erode, Catalepsy, Speak to the Dead, Decay, Hex, Enhance Toxicity, Fiery Furnace, Hold Persons, Dismiss Enchantment, Mend Muscle Tear, Treat Poison, Freedom of Motion, Antitoxin, Inflict Terrible Wound, Hail to Fire, and Inflict Massive Wound. So you have many spells that could cause some sort of pain or toxicity and disease, and you can also talk to dead creatures, raise undead as well. But as you can see, you also have healing spells. So this adds to the flexibility, but you are mostly focused on inflicting harm and causing pain and all sorts of things related to undead, for the most part. Then we have the House of Solace. This is probably going to be the most challenging cleric to play as. The House of Solace is all about being a pacifist. You are quite skilled and at healing, at diplomacy. In fact, you have many skills such as first aid, glean information, etiquette, and manners. You can also turn undead, and even though you can use all sorts of armor and shields, the only weapons permitted are mancatcher, bola, lasso, and net. So this cleric is all about capturing the enemy alive, or trying to stop fights from happening. So this means that most of the time you need to stay close to a party member that is very good at dealing damage. So stay close to the knight, or the paladin, or the ranger, because you're usually going to be dealing very little damage and you're going to be focused mostly on subduing or capturing the enemy. Luckily, your spell selection is really good, and I will talk a bit about that in a few minutes. But a cleric of the House of Solace wants to avoid fights as much as possible. In fact, you have two schools of thought within this faith. You have the pacifists, and this is impossible to play as a player character. They are basically martyrs. They will engage in no violence, no aggression. They will be glad to die instead of defending themselves. So this simply won't work as a player character. But you also have the preachers of peace. And these are focused on promoting peace, stopping conflicts, and perhaps capturing the enemy rather than killing it. So as you can see, it's a very challenging cleric to play. You need a group that is specialized in hacking and slashing and cutting and using destructive spells, because most of the time you're going to be focusing on protecting the other members of the party, on healing, and capturing or hindering the enemy. I will give more details about that when I cover the weapons in a few minutes. But yes, this is a very specialized cleric to play as. And a very powerful ability of this cleric is the peaceful influence. As a peacemaker, you can influence reactions of non-player characters. So there are many fights that you can avoid by just talking some sense, so to speak, into the enemies. So the next time that you are fighting bandits or some evil warriors or knights or whatever, you can start trying to tug your way out of things that, no, we should not fight, this is wrong, or there is so much to waste in just bloodshed, or this is beneath your level, and try to persuade the enemy from keep on fighting, and you're going to shift the level of hostility of your attackers to a point that you could even stop fights before they actually begin. In fact, this cleric has an initiative bonus, so you can start talking as soon as possible, trying to stop a fight. So this cleric could actually be quite useful in combat heavy adventures, because maybe because of attrition you are too wounded, maybe you have already suffered some losses, some of your henchmen or even party members have died, and you cannot withstand or go through more battles. This cleric could actually help you get through different encounters, stopping battles before they happen, potentially. And in more diplomatic situations or more peaceful environments, you could obtain many benefits, perhaps information, some help. Perhaps you can lower the prices in some shops because of your peaceful influence. So there are ways to work, to be useful for the party despite not being able to deal too much damage and constantly looking to capture the enemies. It would be a great idea to travel with those wagons with cages to get all of those enemies that the cleric doesn't want to kill inside, and perhaps later on delivering to the jail at a town or a city, because otherwise you're going to be capturing many enemies because of the petitions or the requests of this cleric, and you're going to have to perhaps tie them up to a tree, and maybe some wild animals could kill those captured enemies. So this class does present some challenges, but I still think it's worth it because of the peaceful influence power. The ability to turn undead, of course, that's always useful, and also the spell selection. Now let's talk about some of the spells of the House of Solace. You have spells from 1st level to 20th level, just like the other clerical class. And you have spells such as Cure Trifling Wound. This is actually a new spell, because in Hackmaster you have so many Cure Wound spells, more than 20 if I'm not mistaken. You also have Detect Poison, Blessing, Bearskin, Consecrate Armor, Hold in Place, Call to Action, Bless Weaponry, Alleviate Fatigue, Analgesic, Blessed Warmth, Cure Large Wound, Cure Considerable Wound, Antitoxin, Cure Heavy Wound, Enchanted Vestments, Part River, Walk on Air, Cure Terrible Wound, Cure Extreme Wound, Regenerate Wounds. So as you can see, most of the spells are focused on protecting, detoxifying, healing. You have some spells that will help you navigate different hostile environments, some utility-based spells, but most of the spell repertoire consists on protective and detoxifying and healing spells. Then we have the Parish of the Prolific Coin. This cleric is all about keeping harmonious business relationships, overseeing negotiations. You can have some shrewd negotiations and good competition, but they should be fair. This cleric is all about money and business and understanding greed. You can use all sorts of weapons with this cleric, but they have to be crushing weapons. And you can use any sort of armor and shield. You lack quite a bit in special clerical powers. You have none. You are skilled in gleaning information, diplomacy, oration, resisting persuasion, seduction, and anything related to business overall. But when it comes to special powers, you cannot even turn undead. But because the clerics are permitted and even encouraged by their temple to sell their wares or their services, this means that you have great opportunities to make some money during adventures. That is, the people in the Hackmaster setting expect the cleric to promote and sell his services, his spells, so the party will probably have no shortage of coin. And because you are in charge of overseeing all sorts of business-related operations or dealings, maybe you will be called upon when there are business disputes, because you should be like the impartial judge. You actually have a neutral alignment, and you could charge a fee for this service, of course. I think this cleric is also great to have as a non-player character. That is, if you are a game master and you have created a very dangerous adventure, it wouldn't be too uncommon to have a group of clerics of the Parish of the Prolific Coin inside a very dangerous dungeon, selling their healing spells and other services. It could be a good way to help the party to stay longer within a dungeon, not having to return to town all the time. So that's one great way of using a cleric of the Parish of the Prolific Coin. You even have information on advancement within the order with titles. First you are an apprentice, then you are a clerk, then a bookkeeper, a financier. So as you can see, it almost feels like you're handling a shop or handling a business. So the theme is actually pretty cool. Now when it comes to spell selection, you have all sorts of spells related to healing, to harming, utility spells. So this adds to the theme of being more like a divine shopkeeper of sorts. You have spells for almost any type of situation. So I think this makes up or ameliorates the fact that you do not have special clerical powers. So you have spells such as Faith Shield, Detect Influence, Improve Vigilance, Command, Consecrate Armor, Exalt Warrior, Hush, Reattach Finger, Animate Zombie, Create Campsite, Miracle Meal, Freedom of Motion, Animate Zombies, Antitoxin, Pillar of Fire, Storm Force Wind, Staff to Serpent, Staunch Bleeding, Exorcism, Fire Strike. So you have all sorts of spells, be it healing, dealing damage, applying some creative solutions to different problems related to the architecture of a dungeon, or when dealing with non-player characters. I think that a cleric of this temple is going to find his place or her place in any party of adventurers. Now, by the end of the book, you have the list of the new spells. I think that of particular note is the Shelter spell. This spell, as it goes up in level, will first allow you to create a small tent, then a hut, And as you grow in power, you will be able to create houses and even very luxurious places of refuge. So this is always handy to have when you are going deep into the wilderness and you don't know if it's going to be safe to set up camp. It's much easier to defend a huge brick house instead of just setting up some flimsy tents. So this is a very useful spell in my opinion. Then we have at the end of the book information on the new weapons. They are mostly focused on immobilizing and hindering your opponent. You have the bolas, a throwing weapon, and this is quite useful to tangle the feet of your opponent, topple them, getting them prone, and ganging up on your enemies when they are down, of course, finishing them off. You also have the lasso. This is a very interesting weapon because you can target different areas of your opponent's body. If you lasso the enemy's torso, or his arm, or his feet, it's going to have different effects. Because, for example, if you lasso his torso, you can keep him from moving. If you lasso his arm, you could prevent your enemy from using his weapon. If you lasso, for example, the shield arm, he's going to lose that shield bonus. And if you can actually try to strangle your opponent, you can lasso the neck and try to strangle him. So this is a very useful weapon. Using this weapon is probably the best way for the cleric of the House of Solace to kill an enemy in a moment of great need. Maybe the cleric is going to be like, oh no, forgive me for this, and he's going to have to strangle the enemy. You also have the man catcher to entrap your opponent's neck and keep him from moving, because if he moves he's going to hurt himself with the spikes of the man catcher. And you also have a net. I think that the net is going to be quite thematic if you want to create a gladiator type of fighter, because there are many ways in which you can use this net. You can actually use it as a whip. You can actually use it to entrap the opponent's shield so that he loses his shield advantage. And of course you can also try to envelop your enemy completely using the net. There's all the information required to see the difficulties of escaping a net. Maybe the enemy has some tools, a knife or a dagger that he can use to try to cut his way out. So as soon as you get your enemy entangled on this net, you better start attacking him right away so that he either you kill him, or if you want to capture him, you knock him out so that he doesn't escape the net. And you also have the sickle. The sickle is pretty standard. It does a decent amount of damage, not too much, but it's also quite decent when it comes to the speed. It's a quick weapon or fast weapon to use, and because you only require a strength of 4, it's for characters that have not invested too much in their bodybuilding. So this is a good weapon for a cleric type of character that is focused more perhaps on spell casting, but still wants a weapon that he can use because of his lower strength and still attack at a decent speed. You also have a table on how to use these weapons as ranged weapons, like the bolas, the lasso, and the net. They can all be thrown. So what do I think of the Zealot's Guide, book the first for the Hackmaster role-playing game? I think this is a great book to have when it comes to the Game Master. The new cleric classes, the gear and the spells are going to be useful in any sort of adventure. If you need an evil cleric as perhaps the main villain of a campaign, you could use a cleric of the Congregation of the Dead. If you want a cleric that perhaps is just there to offer some help for the player characters, you could have a cleric of the House of Solace. And if you want a merchant that actually has some justification as to why he's selling healing spells in a very dangerous dungeon or swamp or haunted castle or whatever, you could use a cleric of the Parish of the Prolific Coin. And when it comes to the player characters, these clerics are quite specialized. I think you should first talk with your game master to see what type of campaign you are running. If the party is going to allow evil characters within it, like for example the cleric of the Congregation of the Dead, because otherwise your objectives are going to clash with the objectives of the other party members, or their fates, or their oaths, their codes of conduct and honor. I think it's going to be also quite challenging to use a cleric of the House of Solace because of his pacifist nature, because you're constantly going to try to stop bloodshed from happening all the time. Otherwise you're going to suffer penalties because you're not going to be role-playing a cleric of this temple. And when it comes to the cleric of the Parish of the Prolific Coin, I think this is a very flexible cleric to be used in any sort of campaign. No trouble at all when it comes to this cleric. So if you are a player and you're thinking of using any of these clerical archetypes, first talk it out with your game master and the other members of the party to see if it won't clash with their methods. And when it comes to the net, the bolas, the man catcher, etc., it's always useful to have some way of attacking your opponent without killing him or hindering him during battle as a sort of debuff that is negating the use of shields and weapons is always useful. And the fact that you can also topple the opponent using several of these weapons, that's also going to be quite handy in battle. And of course, you can always capture those villains if you have a member in the party that specializes in torture and have some persuasive chats with them later on. So those things considered, I highly recommend the Zealot's Guide Book the First for the Hackmaster role-playing game. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.